Saline City Council work meeting of February the 29th to order at 6:30 p.m. I do need to note that Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes will not be present tonight at either the work meeting or at the regular meeting, but the rest of council is present. That includes Mayor Morrow, Council Members CO, Dillon, Gearbaugh, McClellan, and Tahar. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, and Police Chief Rennick. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, if you'd please sign in to the back, or in the back, excuse me, to my left, we would appreciate it. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
So moved.
As submitted. Thank you, Councilmember Gearbaugh. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. The one and only discussion item this evening is an update to the policy and procedure manual for the Saline Police Department, specifically Lexipol. You should have a memorandum dated January the 25th, 2016 from Police Chief Rennick, as well as what is essentially a PowerPoint, Chief, from Lexipol.
No, there will not be a PowerPoint.
Okay.
I've got a couple of videos to show.
Okay, very good. I guess with that, Mr. Campbell, do you have anything that you'd like to comment on? Well, then I will turn it over to you, Chief Rennick.
Okay, I think what I'll do is, hopefully everybody's had about a month to take a look at the memo that I provided, and I'll be happy to go over it section by section if you'd like. But I think what I'd like to do is start off with these two videos from Lexipol. One is directed at police chiefs of why Lexipol is a good product, and then the second one is designed for councils and boards for approval. So let me go ahead and start that.
Law enforcement is the government's most visible public agency. The best way to enhance your agency's reputation and increase respect is with sound, defensible, up-to-date policies coupled with daily policy training. That's exactly what the Lexipol subscription service provides. Lexipol begins with a customizable, reliable, and regularly updated online policy manual service. Then we add daily training bulletins with real-life scenario-based policy training tools featuring high-risk, low-frequency events. Our legal and experienced public safety team instills complete confidence by constantly monitoring and reviewing government legislation and case decisions. Anything that impacts agency policy is automatically updated in your web-based policy manual with 24/7 access. In less than 10 minutes a day, your personnel can complete the verifiable training module that may qualify for continuous training certification. The Lexipol subscription system is based on federal and state laws, regulations, and law enforcement best practices. Thousands of agencies across the country trust Lexipol. We're the only company that offers digital law enforcement policy manual management, regular policy updates, and certifiable daily training against policy. Lexipol simplifies the process of implementing and managing all of your policy manuals and training through an optional policy implementation and management service. You keep control of your policy while we do all the work. To protect your law enforcement agency, inspire your team, stay completely up to date, and reduce your exposure to risk, go to www.lexipollawenforcement.com.
And I think before I show the second video, there's 5 points that I think I'd like to hit on as far as this video goes. First of all, I know one of the comments that came up was, you know, Saline's a unique place. We don't necessarily have the same problems that a New York Police Department or Los Angeles or San Diego or something like that would have. And what are we going to do with these big, giant policies that, you know, are for those agencies, not for little Saline? Well, the first thing that he said in there, which is true by talking, I talked to both the Midland Police Chief and the Jackson Police Chief, is they're customizable. They will provide you a template, and you look at that template, and if there's stuff that purely does not apply to your agency, you remove it. If there's something unique to your agency, you add it. And then that is incorporated into the policies. The second thing is that they're always updated. No matter what happens in the world, these will be updated, and I'll talk about that in just a second about an update that just occurred to their policies after I show you the second video. The other part of this is that they get 10 minutes worth of training every day on policy. Policy is one of those things that, you know, sometimes you put them out, you read them, and then you put them on the shelf, and you don't look at them again for a long time. This keeps them fresh, keeps them in front of the officers, keeps them in front of the sergeants, and keeps them in front of the police chief as well on a daily basis. The fourth thing is that they're law enforcement best practices. That kind of goes along with the first one in that it's not necessarily a template that San Diego, Los Angeles put out. The best practices in Michigan. What are the best practices that law enforcement are using in Michigan? And I think John Hess even mentioned that in his report about law enforcement best practices. And you're going to see that that's how these policies are put together. And I think one of the other comments that came up, I think at our last meeting, was the idea is, you know, this is a significant amount of money. Have we looked at other places that may put this out? This is the only company that does this. So they're unique in this aspect. If there are any questions on that, I'll be happy to answer those. If not, I'll show the second video.
When you say the only company that provides this type of service, is that unique to Michigan? Are there some organizations that exist elsewhere in the United States that provide this? Similar to, and you might want to talk a little bit about the history of Lexipol. Lexipol very recently started offering this service in the state of Michigan.
That's correct. I don't know that answer, and I apologize that I don't know if there's a company in California that would offer something else, so I don't know that. It is the only one in Michigan that I am aware of. And Lexipol, as you said, just came into the state of Michigan in June of 2016. It had been talked about for the last year and a half, and Lexipol finally broke into the Michigan market in June. As a matter of fact, even prior to the John Hess report, I had been looking at Lexipol as a possibility for making our policies what they should be, because I knew that they were lacking. And so Lexipol is the agency that I believe is going to be able to do that, do it correctly, do it professionally, and do it legally, so we don't run into problems in our policies at a later date.
Before I open up to the group, you may not have an answer to this, and that's fine. Any idea why there was hesitation from Lexipol to get into the Michigan market?
I don't believe it was hesitation. I think they're growing so quickly that they've just kind of moved across the United States. And Michigan, well, we're number 26 out of 50. So we're about halfway in between. They've been in California for 10, 15 years now.
Very good. Questions from the group thus far? We'll start on this side with Mr. Gearbaugh, if you'd like to
You
begin.
mentioned customization, so when we go to do our own policies, how are those updated and reviewed? Do they look at them and then contact you, or, you know, from the perspective of how do we keep our own unique policies updated?
They're sent to the police chief before they're implemented to be reviewed. And if there's something in there that needs to be changed, then they're changed and then sent back. And as long as whatever edits have been made are not illegal or immoral or, you know, against some law somewhere or some best practice, they will allow you to then implement those into your policy. If there's something unique to Saline that, you know, isn't against the law, but it's not in anybody else's policy, they will allow it to be in your policy because it doesn't break any laws.
Anything further, Mr. Gearbaugh? Thank you, sir. Ms. Tahar?
Not at this point.
Okay, Mr. Seal?
One question, and it kind of harkens back to another issue completely, if you don't mind, Chief. Mr. Hess recommended that we needed a rewrite of our policies. As I recall the timing of the meeting here, you then said that yes, you were considering hiring Lexipol, which point Mr. Hess revealed that he was an employee of Lexipol. Were you aware of his employment circumstance before making your recommendation?
No, I had no idea. Matter of fact, it surprised me when he stood up and he announced that to council. But the one thing I do know after that announcement is that he had no connection whatsoever with the law enforcement part of it. He helped write policies for the correction part.
Okay.
Nothing to do with law enforcement, only to do with corrections.
That is his primary background, is it not, law enforcement?
Right, he came up through the sheriff's department in Kent County on the correction side, not the law enforcement side.
Mr. Seal, anything else?
No, not this time.
Ms. Dillon?
I think Mr. Gearbaugh hit on it, but we'll add, so Lexipol do they have legal counsel that's reviewing these? Or do we have to ship off things to our legal counsel and incur fees?
No, they have a staff of attorneys. I think purely as a courtesy to our city attorney, we would probably let him look at those, but they're going to be vetted by half a dozen attorneys before they make it back to us. And they're reviewed on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to make sure that they are legal.
And is that included in the fee that we're paying, or is that an add-on fee?
No, that's in the fee. That's primarily what some of that fee is for, is to pay for those attorneys and stuff.
Okay.
Sure.
And just for clarification, for other people that may be listening to this, when we're talking about policies, we're not talking about like HR policies. These are police policies.
These are police policies.
Okay.
And Lexipol does do fire policies, and they also do corrections policies. I'm not recommending fire or corrections, I'm just talking about law enforcement.
Okay. And then I've got some questions on the officer video, what's it referred to? The training bulletins.
Okay.
You want to ask me now?
Why don't we wait till the
Okay,
second
that's
video,
fine.
but
That's good.
please do.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Dillon. Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, I think Dean hit on it, but so they're communicating the updates through a 10-minute training session every day. That's how they get the updates on the policy, or the officers get the updates on the policy?
They will. The daily training bulletins, I guess we're going to get into this anyways.
Sorry.
That's okay. The daily training bulletins are designed for, like I talked earlier, you put out a policy, they read it, they say they've understood it, it goes on the shelf, and you don't look at it again for another couple of years unless something happens. This forces the officers to have it in front of them on a daily basis. So it won't necessarily be changes to the policy, but just stuff that's in the policy to test to make sure that they know that policy. But if something happens and it's a current event that isn't in the policy, yes, that will come up very quickly, and I'm going to share that shortly about what that would look like.
And again, kind of back to what Dean was saying. So the policies that are specific for Saline would be included in that.
That's correct.
Anything else, Ms. McClellan? Thank you, ma'am. Do you want to transition to the second video you said?
Yes, I'd like to show the second video, and then certainly open for any other questions.
Very good.
This is a little one, so you might want to turn the volume up for this one. And this is Gordon Graham, by the way. This is what Gordon Graham looks like. No laughter, please.
Do you want to give a little bit of background on Gordon Graham?
Depending on, well, I will.
Okay.
Gordon Graham here from Lexipol. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this very brief presentation. It's my understanding that you are the key financial decision maker for your government entity. Your director of public safety, the fire chief, the sheriff, the chief of police has asked you to watch this quick introduction to what Lexipol does and why your public safety agency is interested in our services. My background as a founder of Lexipol includes 33 years in law enforcement and 33 years as a lawyer. But long before I ever went to law school, I did my graduate work at USC in risk management. Their ISSM, the Institute of Safety and Systems Management. Cops, lawyers, we handle tragedies. Risk managers don't handle tragedies. We study them and we look for cause. During my graduate work, I got hooked on the study of tragedy in public safety operations and what can be done to prevent them. You know, events such as in-custody deaths, a fire apparatus collision that kills someone, a police pursuit that ends up in a major collision, events that regularly become the top story in your local news. More than 35 years later, having studied thousands of these tragedies, I can tell you this with certainty. In every tragedy, there is always a proximate cause, the event that instantly preceded the tragedy. But if you go back in time and look for the root cause, and that's what risk managers do, all too often it comes down to a lack of good policy and a lack of good training. I recognized this in the 80s, and in the 90s, I got together with another cop-turned-lawyer, Bruce Pratt, and we put together a company called Lexipol. Our focus is developing high-quality, legally defensible policies for public safety agencies and providing daily training to those personnel in those public safety agencies. Thousands of public safety agencies around America are using this proven approach, and the results are impressive. Lexipol can help you manage the financial risks associated with claims, settlements, verdicts, and rising insurance costs, as well as the political repercussions that arise when tragedies turn into news headlines. If you want to minimize these risks while simultaneously increasing the safety of your public safety personnel and your citizens, please approve your agency's request that might be in front of you right now. Thank you so much for taking the time to view this. I sincerely appreciate all you're doing to improve the quality of government operations in this great country. Gordon Graham, signing off.
And that's what Gordon Graham looks like. He's certainly very interesting to watch in live form. As a matter of fact, he's coming to Michigan in early April, I believe. Quite a guy. So to maybe jump on a little bit what the mayor asked, as you heard, 33 years of law enforcement experience, 33 years as an attorney, became very, very interested in risk management, and has made that basically his life's pursuit. He's very passionate about it, and he's, like I said, he put together this company, Lexipol. And I believe at some point in time, Lexipol will be in all 50 states in the United States, if not, maybe even some of the U.S. territories. His policies are put together very well. They're very easy to understand. And like he said, with the daily training bulletins, the question that came up, they're in front of you every day, so you'll see those every day. The one question that came up about the daily training bulletin was, if something is current or something happened. I actually received an email from Matt Hines, who's the Director of Public Safety for the City of Jackson. And it just so happened that there was an incident where a person with mental illness somehow escaped from somewhere or was causing trouble, wrapped his arms around a pole and wouldn't let go, and they ended up tasing him several times, kneeling on him. He ended up losing his breath and ended up dying. Unfortunately, it was certainly a sad incident. But as a result of that, there was a court case that was decided from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it affected what the taser policy was like. And so, without necessarily reading this, this is what the email looks like. It's to Lexipol law enforcement clients. It says what the case was, so you have an idea of what it was. What are the incident details? It describes the incident from beginning to end, what the incident looked like. The case analysis, from the attorney standpoint, what were the issues with this case? Why did it turn out like it did? Why did the judges rule as they did? And then the last one, which is the most important one, is the policy implications. What implications does this have on our policies that are out there? And then they list what you need to do to your policy, or excuse me, it lists what they will do to your policies, and then training will be provided for your officers, so this same type of action will not occur in your jurisdiction that sadly happened in the jurisdiction where this happened. And that came out, let's see, in fact, the date was February 3rd. So this is just very, very recent. Now, I can tell you right now that this has not hit our taser policy yet, our current taser policy. It hasn't hit it yet. It will, and that's the important stuff that has to happen. These are the ones that are going to get law enforcement in cities and townships, villages sued for huge amounts of money. By getting this put into your policy very quickly, notifying the officers, so that a mistake or an action will occur in the future, will hopefully save lives and save monies for the municipalities.
Anything else you'd like to share, Chief?
One more thing, there's another page to it, I'm sorry. And then there's also training implications. So there's a training scenario for your officers to show them how this works and what you need to do to avoid getting in the same circumstance that these officers are.
Sit. Well, let's open it up for questions. Again, I'm gonna begin, if the group will indulge me. And Chief, I'm gonna preface by saying my questions are gonna contain a little bit of commentary, so just bear with me. So I've got two main questions. The first of which, and you and I have discussed this, and I discussed this previously with Councilwoman Tahar, but certainly I believe that the policy and procedural manual needs to be updated. That needs to be done thoroughly, but also expeditiously. And when that recommendation was first made by Mr. Hess, my idea was to convene a task force or a work group, not unlike we've done with a number of issues and problems in the community, to address this. You've alluded in your presentation why engaging Lexipol may be a a better choice than convening and organizing, some sort of work group. Do you want to elaborate on that a bit for the group and for the members of the public who are present?
Well, I think the selling point, I guess is what you'd want to call it for Lexipol, is it's not just policy and procedure development. It's what happens after the policies and procedures are developed. These daily trainings, these updates that come, for very, very important cases. That is something that is lacking in a lot of law enforcement agencies in Michigan and other areas as well that do not have a service like Lexipol. We had a department meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the comment come up about we have some very talented people, and I agree, we do have some very talented people on the police department. But the idea of them having to make sure that all the laws are followed, all of the best practices are followed, and all the updates are put into place is almost impossible for them to do. So whether it would be our officers, our staff, myself, putting these policies together, we are never going to have that benefit of the daily training bulletins, nor are we going to have the benefit of having that information very, very quickly on big cases. That is just not going to happen. There was an incident several years ago, MML policies. Now, MML policies are sample policies. They're put out. They have excellent content, but they have very limited people that can look at these things, and things slip through the cracks. And it so happens that it certainly can cost an agency if something like that were to happen.
Well, that's helpful. The second question I have, and you provided in the packet, I believe, a letter from the police chief in both the city of Jackson and Midland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I actually, although I did not speak to the police chief in Midland, I did speak to Maureen Doniker, who is the mayor of Midland, I believe last Wednesday or Thursday. I guess it doesn't matter. And I think between your office and City Manager Campo, you helped to facilitate that, and I appreciate it. And actually, we had probably an hour-long conversation on a whole host of important issues. But she had a pretty in-depth conversation with her chief and with related staff people in management positions within the Midland Police Department about Lexipol. The comments were very, very positive. The police chief is very enthusiastic that the city of Midland is using the service to update their policy and procedure manual. The one question I asked her, chief, and she was unfortunately unable to provide me an answer, and you might not have an answer either, but it relates to the training videos. I wonder what the response and the commentary is from individual officers who have to review that material on a daily basis, whether they find it beneficial, worthwhile, and helpful. And again, we might not have data on that, but that's an insight and a perspective that I think would be valuable.
I agree. I think that online training is what online training is, and that's really what it's going to be. That's why it's very quick. It's 10 minutes. As you are aware, we belong to Police One as well, and we get videos every month that the officers watch. And some of the comments are, if it's a long video or if it's a long training session, it becomes very boring sometimes. That's why they limit these to 10 minutes. We're going to hit you real quick. We're going to get you the information. We're going to give you a 1 or 2 question quiz, and you're going to be done with it. 10 minutes probably is not going to be as tedious as some of those longer videos. So my guess would be, and that's purely what it is a guess, is that it won't be too gruesome to the officers to do just 10 minutes a day.
Okay. I guess what I would be interested in, it's probably just as the difficulty here is sending a simple email to the chief in Midland, Jackson, and any other municipality who engages Lexipol, is to ask maybe their chief, deputy chief, or a person of contact, what sort of feedback are you receiving from officers? I'm not really concerned that the 10-minute video is onerous, because I don't think a 10-minute video is onerous. I guess the insight and perspective I'm interested in is, are these officers finding the videos helpful and beneficial? That's all I had. Let's start at the other end of the table. We'll begin with Ms. McClellan.
Yeah, that was kind of my question too, is it one of those, like, you're going to watch a video, are you going to get anything out of it, or, you know what I mean, are they going to, you can watch a video and click the answers and say, yeah, I've watched it and I'm updated, but is it going to be a cost benefit for them to do that? I mean, obviously for big issues, I can see that being the case, but I'm wondering also if you mentioned San Diego and New York and stuff, are some of the big city policies going to be implemented, and are our officers going to have to watch videos that are not really pertinent to them?
No, they're going to be required to watch certainly information about our policies. Now, there's going to be a general theme throughout all the policies. It doesn't matter whether you're a 2-officer department or a 5,000 officer department. There's going to be general themes, and that's what they're hitting on, is the general themes. When it gets down to the real nitty-gritty stuff, if there's something really peculiar for Saline, and we're the only ones that do it, yes, they will include that as well, and that would only come to us. So if there's something that just happens in New York City, we're not gonna get that.
Okay.
We're only gonna get stuff
I
that's.
just, I don't want to waste,
Yeah.
to me, it would be, are they gonna waste their time watching something about something that is for 10,000
Right.
person agency?
Anything else, Ms. McClung?
I think that was it.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Dillon?
I just want to go into videos. Was it mandatory, will it be mandatory that the officers complete the training?
Yes. Matter of fact, as soon as they sign into the computer, they'll get it.
Okay.
And they, yes, they're required to complete it.
And so what would the ramification be if they don't?
Well, discipline certainly.
Okay.
If they didn't follow that, or if there was a reason why they didn't do it, certainly there may be they got a hot call and they couldn't do it right away. But at some point during their shift, they should be able to pick that up. There shouldn't be a good reason to skip it.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask, is there like any recourse against employees, like if they're getting the incorrect answers? Like how many opportunities do they have to answer this correctly? And what happens, if they're repeatedly getting their answers wrong?
Well,
I mean, are you notified of that?
they cannot get out of the system until they get the right answer.
Okay.
So.
Are they like multiple choice answers?
Multiple choice, true, false. It's not like an essay.
Right.
Yeah. I mean-
Right, so eventually they're gonna run out of options,
Yeah.
so in process of elimination.
Right.
it's gonna be
And-
so-
But what it'll do is if you pick B and it was supposed to be D, and I can't even think of a scenario right offhand, it would then refer them back to the part where they missed, so they could reread that again and then bring them back to the quiz again.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not just you keep picking until you get it right. It's going to force you back into the policy. And that's probably the thing that, as the mayor said, is it going to be useful? Well, nobody wants to reread a policy 3, 4, 5 times if they don't have to. So I think they're going to be very diligent in picking the right answer the first time, because nobody wants to look at it 2 or 3 times.
Okay. Well, will you be maintaining records of those results?
Yes, we do get results on a monthly basis, including how much time the officers have spent doing this. An average officer works 20 days a month, so we're looking at about 200 minutes a month worth of training that they'll get, and it certainly will go into the training record.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dillon. Mr. Seal? And yes, please remember to use the microphones.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I want to take a few minutes to express kind of my background, my personal reference to this. Since this whole issue came up, I've given it a good deal of thought and consideration. As you all know, I have experience in this field, both with the Ann Arbor Police, with the Saline Police. And today I received a phone call from one of the current police officers at the Saline Police Department expressing his concern, should we adopt the chief's recommendation. So I've given this a great deal of consideration, and I kind of want to go on the record with where I am and where I'm coming from.
Please.
When I worked at the Ann Arbor Police Department, we engaged in an exercise called CALIA. It was I've forgotten exactly what CALIA stood for, but what it was a group they gave you an outline of policies for an agency of your size representing a city of your size, and said you had to have policies on all these topic matters. And the policies generally had to follow a certain format. They had to be written such that they were vetted finally by a CALIA team that would come to your agency. They'd interview the community to see how the police department was performing under these policies. And finally, if in fact you were deemed to have written the policies correctly, you had the proper number of policies, and you followed the policies, you were certified, CALIA certified. That took a great deal of time and effort, writing those policies. And when I first went to the Ann Arbor Police Department, we were each issued 2 very large books full of policies. It wasn't that Ann Arbor was reticent to produce policies. In the CALIA effort, they had one police captain dedicated solely to the business of writing policy. They had several of us who would actually go through and review his writing of the policy to make sure that it was correct. And we had a detective lieutenant who was an attorney who would also review the policies from a legal standpoint. Took a lot of effort. Granted, Ann Arbor's a little larger. Now I come to Saline Police Department as the deputy chief here. And at that time, we had a different risk manager. I've forgotten the name of the outfit. It was up in Clarkston somewhere. And they had an attempt to write model policy involving a number of police chiefs, deputy chiefs. We had a sergeant on the committee. We would meet monthly and try and hash out what we thought were model policies for police departments of mostly medium size. We would spend, in many cases, the whole weekend working on one policy and never complete it. And we had a staff attorney who was hired to come to those from a very well-known law firm in the state of Michigan to make sure that what we were trying to write was legal. A lot of effort. We didn't produce many results. Then Paul Bunton, who was then the chief, and myself set as a goal, we had both heard Gordon Graham speak in person. As you say, he's a very charismatic speaker. He was a lieutenant with the California Highway Patrol for many years, and a man of some acumen and renown around the country, and probably internationally as well. I've heard him speak twice in person, and to this day I still subscribe to his weekly Lexapol. He has usually about a little 5 or 10 minute blurb that talks about some aspect of police or fire safety, how you conduct yourself, how you take care of yourself, how you protect your community from liability and so on. So I know that Gordon Graham is a renowned expert in this field. One of the difficulties Paul and I had, even when we wrote policy and tried to stay with the discipline of doing that on a regular basis, was a lot of things would come up on a day-to-day basis that would divert our attention, divert our energy. At the end of the year, we'd say, how did we do? Well, we didn't do so well because one thing after another came up, and we never met our goal of writing the number of policies that we wanted to write. Even when we promulgated a policy, we said, how do we know that the officers are reading these things? Or, if they read them, that they understand them correctly. Seems to me this Lexapol program is sort of the answer to a lot of those questions. It not only produces the policies in a timely manner, it challenges the officers, and it's not as a matter of discipline that they're given these tests. Like the chief said, it's redirecting if they have the wrong answer to try to show them the correct answer, the correct way to implement these policies that are key to the survival and the proper functioning of a police department and to help save and preserve the community which they serve by making sure that they follow the latest state of the law, which can be very troublesome, especially with the court rulings that come out time after time, changing the way we do things. So I fully support the chief's effort with this Lexapol program.
Very good. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Seal. Tough one to follow.
You took the words out of my mouth. So actually, a lot of so my questions have been about this more, the cost-benefit analysis and having to do with, so I'll just run through them anyway, though I think that Mr. CEO has answered a lot of them conceptually for me. So I know we knew before the departmental review, we had heard from time to time you were working on policy updates. So my question was, what was your sense of urgency about that? And how long would it have taken in the time available to you between all the other demands of the job? And I think I have a sense from Mr. CEO that's one of the things that is a goal that isn't always attainable.
Right, and I sit actually on the MML sample policy committee, LEAF, up in the Lansing area, and certainly it's very, very time consuming. As he said, and I've sat in those same chairs where you get done with a weekend and you not even put out one policy, because they are so, one word can certainly make a difference. The urgency is, you know, if you have the big policies in place and there's nothing overly flawed with them, you know, it's like it's okay. And the ones that are in place that, you know, both, you know, Chief Button and Deputy Chief Seal wrote are okay. I mean, it's nothing that's going to cause us huge problems. Should they be updated? Yes, they should be updated. But we have a policy manual that's 3.5, 4 inches thick.
That was one of my other
huge.
questions.
I'll bet you there's 250 policies in there. And I think since I've been here, I tackled 15, 18 policies, got them in place. Policies that officers had been asking about that weren't currently in there, and we took care of that. One of the comments that John made is the new policies that were put into place were very well done, and I appreciated that applause that he said that. But they are just so very, very time consuming. If I could direct 8 hours a day to sit there and work on this, sure, I could probably get this done. I don't have that luxury. You know, budgets are what budgets are. You know, Deputy Chief has not been with the police department for 3.5, 4 years now. I mean, certainly that was a position that helped along those lines, but even with the Deputy Chief and the Chief, they didn't always get done. So as Mr. Seal said, the idea that this is a company that will take care of all of that for you, they'll take care of that. You still get to review it, you still get to personalize it, you still get to add your Saline flavor to it, but yet when the day is done, you can breathe a sigh of relief that legally defensible policies are in place and they're up to date.
Speaking of updates, that was another, so as a point of comparison, under our current approach, and in the past, how have updates been handled? For example, you gave the example of the policy update that came to Jackson, it was Jackson, no, City of Jackson. Does our city attorney's office alert the police department that there's this new case that's been decided and might require some adjustments to policies, or how do you become aware of those under the current scenario?
If the city attorney were aware of them, and they're not always aware of those type of things, was I notified by our city attorney on that particular one? No, I was not. Was I notified by MML, our risk carrier? Yes, I was.
Okay.
So MML attempts to keep up with that, but they have very limited staff as well, and it's only as good as the information you get.
Right, okay. I guess the last question I'll ask, at least at this point, is so in the customization process, how would you involve other members of the department, or would you be the one working directly with Lexipol? How would that give and take with the customization work?
Well, after the department meeting, I will be glad to share that information.
Okay.
Because this is a lot of work. It really is. We do have, you know, one member on staff who was a former captain for the University of Michigan. He's dealt with policies. He'll know exactly what to do when he gets his hands on one, and it's volunteered. I think it certainly will be a life lesson for some of these people that have never had policy, to put one in front of them and say, okay, let's take a look at this, how this affects the city of Saline, and let's work with it. I'm happy certainly to share that with other officers. I don't know that I would have the time just by myself to do that and get it done quickly. I could, but it's going to take some time. If I spread it around to several officers or sergeants, it certainly will go much quicker.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Gearbaugh.
Pretty much the thunder's been stolen, but basically that is some of the issues of how and who would be involved in doing our own specialized policies and so forth, which I think your suggestion is great. That's how we can get the officers involved, the ownership of that and so forth. One of the concerns, and I think that's been brought up, and Ms. Dillon gave us some articles and things that she had looked at, is the concern that this becomes a more standardized approach across not only our city, but across the nation and everything. And so the concern is that we're basically trying to protect ourselves, not necessarily the citizens. I think from my own perspective, when I see this, the fact is that there is a lot of information out there, and if we don't have people aware of what they're doing, they won't understand it. And even my own experience, we have a similar type of MyLink training system that does the same thing and asks questions and so forth. How do you envision understanding that the officers understand what's been given to them. They can go in and do the test, go back and reread it and so forth. What's the follow-up from that to make sure that, spot checking or understanding or whatever? Because some of these issues you hope never actually ever come up. But how do you verify for yourself when you have this type of thing in place that we don't put too much ownership into the system versus the ownership into the individual? And I guess I'd understand how you would approach that.
Well, I think that that's the wonderful thing about the daily training bulletin. It's going to put it in front of the officers, the sergeants, and myself every day. So they're going to see a policy every day. If it's a particular policy that we want to make sure, it's no different than what we do right now, is we would give it to the sergeant, have the sergeant go at roll call, and then explain it, open up for questions. If it's a huge policy that needs, certainly input from everybody, then we certainly could have a department meeting. Making sure that everybody hears the same message at the same time. As far as the template stuff around the United States, there are certain policies that it doesn't matter whether you're from Michigan, Saline, Michigan, or you're from Los Angeles, California, you still have to handle that the right way because that's what the courts have said you have to do. Where it becomes a little grayer would be, as an example, vehicle pursuits. There are some police chiefs who allow you to pursue for a taillight out. I mean, just chase them down until they smash. I mean, there's police chiefs that allow that. There's also police chiefs that say, we have a no pursuit policy. I don't care what the person has done, you will not pursue them. And then you have everything in between. And the risk carriers and the policy and procedure management people, they don't really care what you choose as long as you are able to defend why you chose what you chose. MML, like I said, they put out their policy and it will say, it's okay to chase, it's okay to do this, it's okay to do that. And there's a little note in there, unless you as the police chief decide that you don't want that to occur, then take these sections out of the policy. And they'll defend you for that, just like they would defend you if you chased them until they crashed.
And I think that's where my hope is that, because some of these being so unique, and I think that's where we've discovered some of our own problems in our, what we call this dysfunctional or whatever, is understanding that everybody sees those policies and understands it across the board. And hopefully, if we've got them something that's searchable and presentable to them, instead of being in a book, I know that does lead to a lot more attempt to maybe understand it from even an employee standpoint. Because a lot of people want to understand what they're supposed to do, and if we don't have that in a hard manner, or at least something that's consistent, you can't do that. And I know that I think you have been, and chiefs before you have struggled with that, just as Jack had just mentioned. The only other thing I was wondering is, when we look at the cost of this, and of course it's like $5,000 for this initial year, going forward, and I know we have to do implementation costs, we've talked about that, what type of additional expenses do we see in terms of an annual, I know there's a subscription fee, but I've got to imagine that we're going to be redoing our own, some policies ourselves every year that would be in addition to just what's the subscription. How do we build that type of thing? And don't you think there's going to be a...
Well, no, I actually don't. The subscription, before I answer that, can I just go back for a second?
Sure.
As far as the searchable, yes. These are all searchable. It's just like any Word document. You put in a word, you can certainly find where and about all the different policies that word occurs. The other part of that is, once we have all these policies in place, we are certainly allowed by Lexipol to download a hard copy, so we actually have a physical hard copy that's going to either be kept in dispatch or in the sergeant's office or in the squad room, certainly can be kept. So a person can readily look at something on paper as opposed to having to go to the computer. And that certainly would be available and would be updated. As policy would be updated, that would be updated as well, just by replacing pages. And now I need to remember what you asked.
Cost. Basically, what would happen in terms of
Thank you.
annual costs, in addition to subscription?
The subscription cost covers all that, policies, daily training bulletins, and updates. That's what that costs. The memo that I gave you, there's roughly a $5,500 first year cost, but because of being a part of the MACP, they're going to discount that 5%. And that's what our subscription cost is going to be on a yearly basis, about $5,100, something like that, every year. The $10,000 that I talked about, that's kind of what you're talking about now. That's the part where we take our manual, we ship it off to Lexipol and say, here are all of our policies that we have in place. Some of those you may not have. They are then going to digest those, give those back to us in a legally defensible format and return our manual to us with all of the extra policies that we may currently have that even Lexipol doesn't have.
Got it.
And I'm sure we're gonna have some, because we are unique. I mean, and I don't mean unique that Saline is the only place that has these, but other smaller departments will have these kind of things as well. And we will certainly get those back. I mean, there's stuff in our policy manual about shift work. I mean, that, a person that has 30 officers on a shift doesn't have to worry about it. But ours is unique. We have to have that shift policy so people can understand where they're working and how they're working and why they're working where they're working.
Anything else, Mr. Gearba?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Sir? Ms. McClellan, did you have an additional question?
Is that essentially the legal costs, the extra legal costs that you're paying for? I mean, will our attorney still have to look at that then, when we get that back? Because it seems like they're just taking all of the policies, chewing them up, getting, and then giving it back to us, versus us taking our specific policies out, having our attorneys look at those specific policies ourselves, and then giving them back to them. Would that be included within that 5,000, or is that gonna be part of the 10,000? I mean, how does that?
Well, all right, the 5,000 is for the annual subscription.
Right, okay.
The 10,000 is for the reviewing what you have, putting it into a defensible format, and sending it back to you. Whether our attorney wants to look at that, or wants to review those, or should review those, certainly would be up to this body, and I think that's certainly something that can be talked about. I would guess, and Mr. Campbell, if you can help, I'm guessing that there would be a charge for that.
Correct. There would be something outside the retainer that they would,
So it's essentially, their $10,000 is legal fees, essentially, I mean, that's.
sure, but from my understanding, you have attorneys that are specializing in police policies, law enforcement policies, for instance, in this case, that are going to be much more efficient than our municipal attorneys that deal with it all, right? But that's what they do. They specialize in this, so they would. I'm pretty positive they would be. Surely we can follow up with Scott Smith and get an answer by next meeting. But like I said, I'd be very surprised if.
I was assuming that it would be cheaper for them to do it than for us to train.
And that's why my question was about the annual, knowing that we have a subscription rate. I didn't know if we had to decide to do another major review or something, whatever, at some point 5 years down the road, would we be charged another $10,000 because it would be something that's more outside the scope of what our actual subscription is. But it doesn't, from your perspective, you don't believe that's.
Right, but if there happened to be, and I just can't think of one right now, but if there happened to be something 5 years from now where we wanted 10 of our policies looked at, up and beyond what they would normally do, yes, that certainly could be sent to them, they could review them. At this point, now certainly that's going to go up, but at this point, they charge $150 per hour to do that. And as you heard, Mr. Seal, that could add up very quickly at $150 an hour if they spent a whole weekend and didn't even get one policy done. So, I mean, it could be very expensive to do that. Once they're done, I just don't envision that we're going to have that, because we're going to have all of the very, very important policies in place. The only ones that would, at that point, would be maybe Saline specific, that possibly at that point, it wouldn't necessarily need to go to them other than to categorize it and ship it back to us. And that's one that maybe Mr. Smith could certainly take care of.
Yeah, I think that's the piece where it would be that ongoing review that does happen with our unique ones. I think the ones that are being at the high level, the federal requirements that are specific and so forth, those will continue to update automatically because you're going to have to, that's part of the business.
Right.
It's just these other specific ones that, it is the thing about having practices and things in place that after so many years, they need to be reviewed and actually reviewed. And I think that's the piece where we need to figure out, and I think you will, is how to handle that in the future. And bringing in the officers, because I think that's the other piece, that they want to be able to provide the feedback and so forth.
Anything else, Mr. Gearba? Well, I appreciate everyone's comments, especially those relating to the costs. And the one thing that I would add, and Mr. Gearba was quite articulate on this, as was Ms. Tahar, and I think Mr. Seo touched on this as well, is that, well, let me take a step back. First of all, I don't really care how this gets done. I just want it to be done quickly and thoroughly. But second to that is my original notion relating to the creation of some sort of work group or ad hoc committee. You would still need someone from Dickinson Wright, our law firm, to participate and be involved every time that group met, which of course would come at a great cost, and that doesn't even take into account all of the hours of staff time to vet and discuss these policies. So I think the point is, regardless of how you do this, there's going to be a significant cost that the organization has to incur. But to update our policy and procedure manual, that's probably not a bad thing because of the importance that it has. Chief, and this isn't really related to Lexipol, but you and I discussed this briefly, and it might be worth commenting on this for the group as well as the general public. There's sort of a paradigm shift, if I'm not mistaken, relating to policies and procedures for police departments, and Mr. Seo alluded to this. Years ago, it was volumes and volumes, reams of paper on every specific policy or event that may occur, and we're sort of moving in the opposite direction over the last 10 years. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
It's funny because I always make a joke at the MML that if I can get a policy on a matchbook cover, I'll be happy. Because they need to be small, because if you give a 30-page policy to an officer, they're going to have a very difficult time remembering that policy, especially in the heat of the moment. So when you can get it down to just the nuts and bolts, what they really need to know, that's the best way for a policy to look. I agree. Now, there's some policies, like the domestic violence policy, there's just, you can't do anything with it. It's going to be voluminous. You just can't do anything about it.
And based on the research I've done, Lexipol tends to approach these matters the way you're inclined to approach them, which is brevity is often best.
Yes.
Well, unless there are additional questions, Mr. Seo was obviously quite eloquent, and he would favor bringing this back for action at the next council meeting.
Yes, sir.
What is the prerogative and opinion of the rest of council? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just my little bit of statement of this. I think this is a company that we would do well with to have this because of the way they're set up. I know there is a concern from how it was entered and discussed at a council meeting. We found out about it. And I do understand that concern from audiences and members of police boards that have said that. I don't think that is the biggest driver on this. I think the aspect of that this company is the best one. We take this information that we've received here tonight to achieve at least that part of that goal of continuing to do this. And I believe the recommendation by the chief should go forward with it. I would support this at this point.
Okay, so come back at our next council meeting then on the 14th, or at least that's the opinion of council members Seo and Gearbaugh. Ms. Tahar?
Yes, I agree. And I also was concerned about the possible public perception that's been, the questions that have been raised about that, but I believe those are, I agree with Mr. Gearbaugh that those are satisfied for me. And I also would support moving forward with this essentially for two reasons. One is accomplishing a task that for a relatively small investment of money that would cost the department and the city huge amounts of time and personnel costs and legal costs for us to do on our own. It seems, judging from Mr. Seo's comments and other things we've learned, it seems like it will be a good product. So that's that. I think it's, so for me, that investment of a relatively small amount of money, which leaves our police department personnel free to do their feet on the ground jobs, I think is a really good investment. Okay. And secondly, I think that the daily training bulletin feature sounds like a really good tool for the department. I think the training aspect is also really attractive to me, so I will favor it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Mr. Seo, do you want to add anything else?
Just that there's probably, thank you. I would opine that there's probably only, about 4 or 5 policies that will truly get you into trouble, and those are those that deal with life and death situations that officers engage in. Vehicle pursuits, shooting incidents, domestic violence situations, and things like that. And I think the department recognizes that, at least I know they certainly did. We trained at the range. We didn't just go to the range to shoot the weapon. We went to the range and talked about policy, talked about how do we adhere to the policy that's set forth by the chief of police of the Saline Police Department. so that we don't run afoul of the policy. I think that, and I don't know how often it's done now, but we tried to get officers on a fairly regular schedule back through precision driving training. And I believe that also included training elements of the pursuit policy and when it was legal to pursue and not. So those kinds of things are done on a broader basis, I think, and don't necessarily always, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that it's not just this 10 minutes per day that's spent in training by officers, but there are a lot of other opportunities for training on a lot of the more serious policies that they deal with.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Ms. Dillon, you're comfortable with bringing this back?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, my only concern is if they're just in kind of shopping aspect of it, I suppose. If there is any other, just to have a comparison, if there's any other companies, you said there was not any other companies
Not that
that
I'm
do
aware of.
this? Okay. Then, yeah.
Okay. So Chief, actually, a couple things for you and the city manager. Obviously, in keeping with the best practice of this body, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes is not here. Perhaps later this week or next, you and Mr. Campbell could reach out to him, maybe give him a synopsis of what was discussed and what the consensus was, and offer to meet with him if he has any questions or concerns. In addition, some feedback, if it can be retrieved from the municipalities in the state or in the region who engage Lexipol, to see what individual officers think of the training videos would be beneficial. And then Mr. Campbell is also going to contact Dickinson Wright, specifically Scott Smith, to inquire what kind of fee we would be looking at when we pass along vetted policies to his office for additional comments and review. Very good. Anything else then? I'm glad that we had this as a discussion. We took up nearly the entire hour, and I think they were good comments, good questions, and I appreciate everyone's interest in this issue. It's very important. Thank you, Chief, for your time as well. Referring back to the agenda, if there's nothing further from the group, we come to public comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments?
John Heller, 213 Sheffield. And like Jack, I was involved in law enforcement for 25 years, but not at his level, that's for sure. And I guess that's what I would say from speaking from my experience as a dispatcher and not knowing probably a lot of the things that Jack does from his level. I will say, though, that when I was working under Chief Douglas, I was pulled off of dispatch and assigned to basically collate, rewrite policies from publications that he received that updated policies in the way they should be. And I think, and I haven't been there for 7 years, but that was the basis of the policies that now exist. And obviously I wasn't really writing policies, I was more like a technical writer who was put it into a certain format. So I speak from that experience, and then when Jack and Paul were writing, when they took over from Chief Douglas, and I was the one who put them into the format and distributed them to the officers. The thing that I see from that perspective, and from my perspective as a citizen, is that the question really is, how much time does this take? Jack said, you know, the chief and the current chief have other things to do that they can't concentrate on that. But from the rank and file perspective, from my perspective as a citizen who sometimes hears things from the department still, the perception is, it would be a false perception because of where I'm perceiving it from, is that the chiefs, all chiefs, say that they don't have time to do this kind of thing. And yet it appears that they do, because they're doing things that we don't know about possibly, but that they're not spending their time on things that they shouldn't spend their time on, one of which is policies and procedures. That's the perception that I had when I was working. That's, I think, the perception that a lot of the officers still have, is that where are the chiefs spending their time? Why aren't they in the office? why aren't there any policies and procedures? Where their salaries are high, it seems to me that they should be able to, and they choose where they spend their time. You can choose to direct them where they spend their time. So why not direct them to spend their time writing policies and procedures, doing the research that needs to be done, and coming up with their own policies and procedures? The perception is, from the lower ranks, from my perspective when I worked there, is that a lot of the chief's time is being spent on things that aren't directly related to what the department needs to be doing and directly related to writing policies and procedures. So that's, I think, where the problem lies within the department, within my perspective. Thank you.
Additional citizen comments? No, then I would seek a motion to adjourn this work meeting at 7:31 PM. Moved by Councilmember Gearba, is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, this meeting is adjourned.